So going down another layer on the pyramid here, we have application security. So this is the most common attack vector. Issues here can range from desktop software like Microsoft Word or just operating systems or productivity tools to web-based software and more. So no matter how much care the developer takes in developing secure code, let's say it's Microsoft, there will always be bugs. Just the nature of how it works. Sometimes these bugs can introduce security vulnerabilities. Sometimes those bugs are just annoying and it makes it hard to use the software, but they're not necessarily security problems. But some of those bugs do introduce vulnerabilities. A lot of application security issues are important to think about today related to web applications. So this is an example of a web application. You might have a booking tool on your website for somebody to reserve a time to come into your business or something like that. If that's being done on your website, it's probably a web application. And if it is, there's a whole host of different issues that you should know about, potential issues related to web applications. So one, won't go into too much depth here, but just one example from a number of years ago was this headline here, and it was "Targeted Attack Uses Heartbleed to Hijack VPN Sessions." And that was an example of an application level vulnerability, and it actually attacked the encryption algorithms that I just talked about. So there was a period of time in 2014 where if an attacker knew about this vulnerability and was willing to exploit it, they could in fact see the transactions that you thought were secure. The issue there was not that the algorithms themselves had been hacked. The algorithms were secure. They just hadn't been implemented properly in OpenSSL. That's exactly why you should not be trying to implement any of these things yourselves. It's important to know about and ask the questions though. One more layer down the pyramid is endpoint security. So endpoints are devices that are connected to your system. That could be a desktop, it could be a laptop, it could be a mobile device, it could be other things. For example, if you have IoT devices like a security camera that's connected to the internet that's monitoring the front door at your business, that's another example as well. So often, but not always, these are connected to the internet, so the outside world and or your local network. Endpoints can and do present security vulnerabilities. So Jeremy mentioned a few times today the idea of botnets, and especially with the example that I gave of the internet connected camera, or maybe you have an internet connected printer. Those are types of examples of endpoints that can form a botnet, which can then be used to do different attacks and nefarious things. I don't know, anything else you want to add related to that, Jeremy?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's this IoT, the Internet of Things, right? You've got all of these devices that have circuitry that connect to the internet. And oftentimes when you're talking about this technology that's distributed, the stuff that you go out to Best Buy, it's sitting on the shelf. There are, without buying a newer version of the very same device that has that circuitry that may have addressed that vulnerability, these devices are put up everywhere, right? We use networks to pipe that data back into. Security cameras are a perfect example of this. If you ever want to do some discovery, go out to and search Google for Shodan, S-H-O-D-A-N. And out there on Shodan, there's a tremendous amount of open, publicly accessible cameras all over the planet. You can go out, you can look at streets in London, streets in Paris, all of these things, and it's openly accessible. If you dig deep into Shodan, there are camera accesses where maybe you wouldn't think that maybe normally people would be looking at those kinds of things. Medical devices within hospital systems is a very critical piece of this Internet of Things, right? You have respirators, you have ventilators, you have heart monitoring devices, you have Even the circuitry that powers the posture of a bed so nurses can do it remotely, all of these things network connected back into the hospital mainframe, and then the hospital mainframe connected to the internet, obviously to move that data other places, right? So those devices can be used to send information, or what we call packets, across a network wire to denial of service certain infrastructure. And that's the real danger of these endpoints, is that oftentimes when an attacker hits a mid-sized business or even an enterprise business, small business, denial of service is the first step in them being able to move laterally without detection, because you're responding to network connectivity from a business standpoint. So those two attacks will often coincide. They turn all of these devices on the internet towards your network and infrastructure to lock down the internet connectivity to then begin exfiltrating data, right? So it sounds very alarmist and everything, but the Internet of Things, that's really what we're talking about there.
So how do you mitigate some of these issues specifically related to endpoint security? So one of them that Jeremy was kind of alluding to a little bit is something that it's a common sense thing. Any organization can do it, and it's not going to cost you money. And that's changing the default password on your endpoints, especially if they're IoT devices like your security camera, if you've got a Nest thermostat, things like that. So many of these devices are not hacked per se. People just, attackers just have really long lists of what are the default username and password that the manufacturer set up for that device. And most of the time, when people get those devices and set them up at their organizations, they don't change those default usernames and passwords, which means that an attacker can go, and that's going to be the very first thing that they try. They're going to try and see if you changed your default username and password. So that's a common sense thing you can and should do, and it's not going to cost you any money. Other mitigation possibilities for endpoint security issues are IDS, which is an intrusion detection system. It's not the same thing, but you can kind of think of this as a firewall. It's kind of the same idea as a firewall. So that is something that potentially would cost you money. If you're talking about mobile devices, especially with employees these days having work email on their phones, which is very common, just requiring your employees to use a screen lock on their phone in the event that phone is lost or stolen. Whoever gets that is not going to, at least easily, be able to access that person's work email on their phone. Antivirus and anti-malware software. And then also, this is, once again, a relatively simple thing that's not going to cost you any money. Disable use of removable media except where required. What that means is a lot of organizations are going to have people using computers that have zero need to plug in as a USB drive into the computer they're using. If your employee has no need to ever be able to plug in a USB drive, you can disable that or have your IT team disable that. And that cuts off one potential vector of attack, physical vector actually, related to what Jeremy was saying earlier, that's not going to cost you any money.